Hello guys, welcome to episode 5 of this Vue tutorial where we are developing a full CRUD application with a backend API. The topic of this video is implementing the edit employee feature and then adding navigation. So I'm not going to talk about the concepts that we have already discussed, like for example, two-way data binding or reactive variables and things that we have already covered. But if we come across any new topics, things that we haven't discussed yet, I'm going to talk about them. So we're going to create another page called edit employee page. So this page allows the user to edit the information of an existing employee. Right now, our application shows a list of employees, right? Shows a list of employees, and it also allows us to add a new employee. Now we want to be able to edit an employee by clicking on this link. So this is the plan. We are going to create the edit employee page. And you might ask yourself, over the past few episodes, we have only been developing pages. What about components? In the upcoming videos, I'm going to extract reusable logic and template from these pages and introduce components. So no worries. So edit employee page, right? Again, take a look. It is very similar to what we did for adding a new employee. It has a form we're using submit prevent. We're using two inputs, vModel for data binding, two-way data binding, and an input. So it is very similar to what we did for adding a new employee. So I'm not going to talk about these. I know that you have already, probably, hopefully watched the previous episodes and you know what is happening here. The only thing is that whenever the form is submitted, we are handling the submission of the form using update employee, which is a function in the script block of our template of our page that I'm gonna talk about. So let me take you to the application, and inside of the pages or views folder, I'm gonna create a new file called edit employee.view, and then I am going to write the template. So the template is gonna have this form update employee, which we need to create, and then we're data binding the inputs to two reactive variables. Now let's continue talking about the script setup block. So here, as before, we're using router, and then we are using ref and unmounted. I'm going to talk about these. Ref is used for reactive variables, and we're going to talk about routing as well, the routing that is happening, and then the axios, right? And then we are declaring route and router using use route and use router. We're importing use route and use router. And then this is the important thing. When we want to edit an employee, we need the ID of that employee, right? And we need that ID to come as a route parameter. So take a look here. When I click on edit, what you see here is that we are being taken to this route, and this is the ID of the employee that we need to, edit. So in the application, in the edit employee page, we need to get that ID from the route. And we are doing that using this route. So we're creating the route using use route. And then we're saying, you know what, there is a parameter called ID inside of the parameters of the route. Just extract that and put its value inside of this constant. And then this is the ID of the employee that we are editing. Then the reactive variables, then fetch employee as before. You remember fetch employee, right? The important thing here is that in this case, we are fetching the information about one single employee, the employee whose ID corresponds with the ID that we have received in the route. So we're getting one employee from our backend API, and we are setting the values of our reactive variables. When we're setting the values for reactive variables, we need to use dot value, as you can see here. So response data dot name, response data dot position, and then updating. We're setting a put request to this backend, endpoint using the ID of the employee that we are updating. And this is the body of the request. So name.value and position.value. And then we are, as before, similar to what we did for add employee, we are taking the user to the root of the application, and the root of the application will render the home page. The home page will render the list of employees. And then whenever the component is mounted, again, we're gonna fetch employee. So fetch employee, as you remember, fetches the details of one single employee. And then it is going to set the values for those reactive variables. And when the reactive variables get values, it means that inside of the template, these two inputs will get the values inside of those reactive variables, and they're going to show the values inside of these two inputs. So what I am going to do inside of the edit employee is that I am going to create my script setup, and I am going to write the code for the script setup section. Let's import ref and unmounted. Let's import use route and use router. Let's import Axios, and then let's create route and router. Route is used to extract the ID, and then we need our reactive variables, name and position. Then we will create fetch employee to get the details of one employee whose ID we have to update those reactive variables. And then update employee is going to send a put request to our backend API using the values inside of those reactive variables, and then we're going to navigate the user to the root of the application, and we're going to call fetch employee when we mount the component. Now what we need to do inside of our router is to uncomment the edit employee, and then we need to uncomment this as well. So that means that and by the way, inside of app view, you remember, right, we are showing whatever the route is rendering currently based on the route of the application. So right now, because we are at the root, router view is going to take a look at this and is going to render the home page. But when we navigate to this route using add new, again, the router will take a look at this route and render this page. And here, when we click on edit for editing, an employee, we are going to be taken to this route, edit with the ID of this employee, Bob Designer. And because we're using reactive variables, the values inside of those reactive variables are going to be put inside of these inputs. Again, if you take a look at the edit employee page, you see that when we get the information for one single employee, for example, when the component is mounted, the values for those two reactive variables are set. And when they get new values, the template will reflect those two new values, because these are bound to one another using vModel or two-way data binding. In Vue, it is called vModel. In Angular, it is called ngModel for two-way data binding. But in React, if you know, I don't know whether you've watched my courses or not. In React, when you need to do two-way data binding, you actually need to take another route. So you use a state, a local state, and then you handle the unchanged event on the input. In React, it is a little bit, more involved, a little bit more, let's say it requires a little bit of, more setup, let's say. But in React, in Vue and Angular, no, with one, directive, vModel and ngModel, in Angular, you get two-way data binding out of the box. Now, Bob Designer, let's change Bob Designer to Lead Designer. Right now, when I change the value inside of this input, because we have two-way data binding, the position has now been updated with this new value. And when I click update, take a look here. When I click update, the form is going to get submitted. And when the form is submitted, this function is going to be invoked. An update employee is going to send a put request to our backend API with the new value inside of the position. So the position will be position.value. Value means the value of this reactive variable, which in this case is lead designer. And then when I update this, it's going to update the backend API for this employee, this specific employee whose ID is what? Is 2, right? And then it's going to take us back to the root of the application. Update. And Bob, lead designer, as you can see. If I refresh the code, you see that lead designer is still here. Now let's talk about the nodes. So form fields use vModel. We've discussed this. I'm not going to talk about this before. We've discussed submit prevent. You can study these as well for yourself. We are updating the employee using this function, and whenever the employee gets mounted, we're going to call the fetch employee. And then the script block, which we talked about, we're using use route. This gives us access to the route parameters like ID of an employee. We have used unmounted. We have also talked about unmounted when we were developing the add employee page. So it's a lifecycle hook used to fetch existing employee data when the component first loads. Axios get, Axios put, and router.push to get us back to the home page. So this is the workflow of the application. I have already talked about this using VS Code, and we also did this in the previous episode. So right now, for example, what I can do is I can update the app view, right? For example, for the header, I can add an H1 called view, for example, employee manager, and then the home page has this H2, which says employee list. But inside the app view, I can say this is going to be a div with, let's say, an H1 for view employee manager, H1, and then here we are going to take this guy and put it here, right? So this is the H1 that we've got here, and router view is going to render the home page here with the employee list H2 tag, and that's it. And I'm going to wrap up this video here. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. If that's the case, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one.